Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Limnacker, and just want to share with you one of the top stories that we are following, that we're going to continue to follow here on Atlanta News First until, really until we get some word on this, which is the potential indictment of the former president, Donald Trump, right here in Fulton County. It's having an impact on the city already. So we are definitely in the window right now where the former president could be indicted here in the state of Georgia, to be clear about that. But just showing you this map because there are barricades set up near the Fulton County Courthouse, blocking major roads through next week. And just showing you this map so you can see kind of the areas affected. You can see Pryor Street Northwest, part of it is closed. And just be mindful of that if you are commuting through the area. But the indictment, of course, as we've been reporting to you, surrounds the investigation into the 2020 election and whether Trump and his allies tried to overturn the results of it. So we're watching very closely for when this potential indictment is going to come down. I want to bring in now a special guest analyst joining us now. We have attorney and legal analyst Josh Schiffer joining us here in our Atlanta News First studios. Thanks so much for being with us, Josh. First of all, what's your opinion on when we could actually see an indictment come down?
Yeah, this is about the most exciting thing that's ever happened in this small town lawyer's life. And thank you so much for having me here today, Joy. I was down there this morning, and you're right, the streets are shut down. Two of the biggest thoroughfares in the justice universe in Georgia are closed. Lots of police. Fani Willis has basically told the entire court system, stay away. If you don't have to be here, don't be here. And we're going to get her announcement, whatever it is, sometime this week or next week. And that's going to come down to how she decides to proceed, because she holds all the cards. That's the elected district attorney, Fani Willis, who replaced a longtime Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard in the last election. She is a very experienced prosecutor, especially with these big RICO charges. A lot of people are wondering if the Trump indictment is going to include RICO. I think that's a pretty safe conclusion, given some of the staffers she has brought in during the process and just what the case looks like. But we should be getting an announcement literally in 1 minute or anytime over the next week or two. We don't know. All we do know is that once it is signed, we will all get it very quickly. It will be published and everyone will get access to it at the same time.
There was a major development that happened yesterday, which was that we reported, well, as we reported yesterday, Georgia's former lieutenant governor has now been subpoenaed to appear before the Fulton County grand jury examining this alleged interference. Jeff Duncan, now the third publicly known witness to receive a subpoena to testify before the grand jury. He says he's going to be present. He says he's going to be an open book. Josh, what impact do you think? Well, first of all, what does this mean? What's the implication?
It's a great question, because generally the evidence gathering in any kind of indictment, it's long done. By the time this is at grand jury, it's presentation of the evidence, and the indictments that the grand jury are going to be considering were actually brought and designed and are the work product of the special grand jury, which existed for about a year, and they published a report. What's happening right now is Fani Willis's office is presenting that report as well as requested indictments for review by the new grand jury. That grand jury is going to review everything, and potentially they are allowed to hear new evidence. Once they hear that evidence and review all the documents, they can bring whatever indictment they want or decline to indict. But these new subpoenas, Senator Jordan was one of them, a prominent member of the local independent press, Mr. Cheedy, was one of them, and then, of course, former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan has been subpoenaed. They each have particular specific perspectives on the investigation and the alleged crimes that DA Willis is looking at. And so the question is whether their testimony is to support the current set of indictments that we're expecting any minute, or is she obtaining their testimony for backup or even a superseding indictment? It's very common after an initial indictment on a complex issue is set forth by the grand jury. Later on, as new evidence is developed or discovered, the charging agency can always come back with a superseding or replacement indictment that would add or subtract charges, and that's almost always going to be at the discretion of the charging agency as long as they're acting within the statute of limitations, which there is not a statute of limitations issue in this case. The state has plenty of time in which to bring their allegations. So is it a last-minute hiccup, or is this part of just a grand plan that Ms. Willis has game boarded out in order to ensure that she accomplishes her job and her obligation of prosecuting crimes in Fulton County?
Josh, I want to interrupt our coverage of what's happening with the Trump indictment just for a moment here, because there's something that just has come down on the wires I want to ask you about, if that's okay, and that is a Supreme Court decision actually to revive restrictions on ghost guns. I want to kind of, I'm not, we're in the news
Big
business,
split
so
in the
I'm
court
getting
there,
this.
5-4.
Yeah, so this has just come down, and just kind of, I know we haven't really had a chance to really prepare for this to come down because it's breaking news, but apparently the Supreme Court agreed to freeze a lower court order that bans the government from regulating these so-called ghost guns, untraceable homemade weapons as firearms under the federal law. Let's turn back to Trump in a moment, but I want to get your quick take on this.
It's a giant victory for the progressive and the left-leaning parts of the community, such as President Joe Biden, who are looking for stronger regulations on these so-called ghost guns. Problem is that the Second Amendment is pretty clear. We can argue over whether the court interprets it properly, whether they're including all of the language or conveniently forgetting a little bit of it. And our Constitution is subject to continual interpretation by Supreme Courts over eras and eras. But what's happened with technology is now, for the first time in the last several years, people are allowed to build at home basically a downloadable, anonymous, untraceable firearm. They can make it home. It does function, and it is an ultra-hazardous instrumentality that can be used to kill someone. So the big question is, where can government step into your private life? Is it something that, as long as it doesn't leave the state, is not part of the streams of commerce? Is that a limitation? Is the government allowed to limit this at all because of the Second Amendment? A lot of arguments. This is a hot issue because of the extraordinary power and dangerousness of some of these ultra-hazardous instrumentalities, but there's clear statutory restrictions on preventing people from owning and possessing firearms. I think that this is not the end of this story. This is just one ruling on one lower court. However, it shows the conservative, stalwart Supreme Court everybody's been counting on may not be as strong as everybody thought.
Yeah, appreciate your perspective on all that. Okay, let's bring it back again to Fulton County, Georgia, and the major story that we're following that could potentially impact all of us here in Fulton County, which is the potential Trump indictment. Okay, so let's get back to that. Let's talk a little bit about the timing here, because we've discussed off camera. This is this grand jury is meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so that means that if a potential indictment comes down, it's going to come down on a Tuesday or Thursday, right?
Yeah, there's actually two separate grand juries that meet regularly, and these are the grand juries that handle all the regular court's business throughout the year. They are presented with all of the charges that the district attorney's office wants to bring, and generally it's kind of a rubber stamp procedure. Probable cause is established, the jurors determine which is the appropriate charge, the paperwork's filled out, and next. That's very different from this case because of the amount of work and planning and effort that's gone in on the front end. So there are two grand juries that meet Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. That is traditionally the dates wherein the grand jury can sign a true bill of indictment, at which point it would be automatically published and shared. We just don't know how that timing's going to work because Fani Willis gets to control her calendar. She also may not act in accordance with tradition and history and step out. I know that she appreciates the element of control through surprise, and that may be something she has planned, or she may have just been making such a big deal about this so that it slows down the process and slows down the public reaction because she, along with everyone else in Fulton County, is concerned about what happens after this indictment drops. They've spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars already hardening the structures downtown, making it so that if there are hordes of rioters or protesters, the system is protected. But really, we haven't seen much of that, and it may be all a much ado about nothing by the time the document actually drops.
Well, and why do you say that? I mean, you say, what if it is much ado about nothing? I mean, what potentially do you think we could just see no indictment? What's the chances that we'll see no indictment?
I think that it's extraordinarily unlikely for her to just close up shop and not bring an indictment. We're really wondering the size and scope of her indictment because she has the discretion to make the charging decisions. And she can choose to make a very small case, focusing just on the former president and maybe a few top advisors, or she can go to the other end of that spectrum and wrap up dozens and dozens of individuals, all who have been thoroughly investigated during this process, and range from, Georgia legislators, some of their staff and assistants, all the way to other elected individuals. Remember, Senator Lindsey Graham has been talked about in this case for his actions in supporting former President Trump during the beginning of this incident, in and around the phone call. There were a lot of actions taken by Georgia elected officials that are being called into question with the alleged fake electors process. We also can get into some of the polling and vote gathering, vote analyzing activities done in other counties throughout the state if Ms. Willis wants to bring an overarching RICO prosecution. And RICO really arms her to the hilt with some of the most powerful investigatory tools out there. If she brings a RICO, it could relate to dozens of individuals, all facing substantial justice.
Now, strategically, though, do you think that it would be wise to actually to prosecute multiple individuals, a lot of individuals, in this indictment, or do you think if her target really is the former president, that it's best to focus on him, either exclusively or him in addition to just a few other defendants?
I don't think there's really one answer to that because there's so many competing obligations. She is an elected official and has sworn obligations to enforce the law. She's going to rely on that the entire time. But that doesn't mean she has to prosecute everybody to the final iota of what is possible. And she has to measure and weigh her resources. Fulton County is already overloaded as we come back out of COVID. There are some other very high-profile cases going on right now, including a very large RICO prosecution, where they're basically on month 8 of picking a jury. That's how slow, laborious, and time-consuming these cases are. It's a massive spend for a prosecuting agency because this case involves people from all over the United States, high-tech issues that are very resource-intensive, and a lot of people are going to question Ms. Willis, no matter what her decision is, as to whether she's properly stewarding her office in its execution of its duties. Is she just supposed to go after the president and a few top people, or are people really going to expect her to thoroughly expose the entire alleged scheme and prosecute everyone involved? That would be a tremendously giant case, make it virtually impossible to keep this smooth and efficient.
I just have our website pulled up because there's so much to follow in the Trump investigation. I just wanted to point this out for our viewers. If you just go on atlantanewsfirst.com, our team has really organized all the coverage that we've done regarding the investigations, plural, into the former president. And again, let's just remind everybody, there have already been 3 criminal indictments against the former president. The first one this year being in New York, related to the alleged hush money scheme involving the adult film star Stormy Daniels, and then the second one being the alleged mishandling of classified documents in Florida. So those some 40 federal indictments, right, Josh?
Yep.
And then the third being the federal indictments out of D.C. that we just saw out of the federal court there regarding the 2020 election, January 6th, alleged interference there. And so one thing, Josh, that we've been talking about is the fact that there were indictments down in D.C. related to activity here in Georgia surrounding the 2020 election. I mean, is that a strong indicator of what indictments we might actually see here in Fulton County, the indictments that we saw out of federal court in D.C.?
It definitely informs the process. Each one of the cases former President Trump faces is unique, and it has its own specific scope. In New York, it's a state court case, but it involves this alleged financing involving the elections and some violations there and some potential fraud. That's absolutely different from the mishandling documents case, which was, remember, investigated in D.C., but actually is prosecuted down in Florida with a whole set of prosecutors and defense attorneys there. Totally different from the straight federal-only civil rights case that is really the January 6th, the main case right now out of D.C. That's a prominent bit of litigation and exposes the former president as well as some of his colleagues to substantial crime. But this one in Georgia, 100% different. This is a different jurisdiction. This is state court only. President Trump and the other going to be defendants are facing a conservative judicial process that is generally fast moving. The federal, we talk a lot about whether the former president can pardon people. That doesn't work here. Georgia has a completely different pardons and paroles process, all the way down to the actual processing of the individuals involved. We haven't seen a booking photo of the former president, but knowing this jurisdiction as well as I do, if he is indicted, I fully expect him to be processed through our main jail at 901 Rice Street, and a booking photo is going to be produced because that is consistency demanded by the rest of the criminal universe down here.
And you know what? I remember that with the previous indictments, I believe there was some campaign merchandise that included a mugshot. So here's an interesting story on AtlantaNewsFirst.com. This Trump saying, we need one more indictment to win the 2024 election, essentially saying, quote, anytime they file an indictment, we go up in the polls. So very interesting. What's your take on? You're not a political analyst, but you have opinions on this, right?
So my personal belief in looking at the politics involved in the intersection of politics and crime, this is unique. How does someone running for a substantially important office, this being the most important office in the United States, how do they deal with multiple concurrent criminal accusations? My opinion and analysis is that Donald Trump's going to do exactly what he's doing already and lean in. He knows he's going to get convicted in court because the court system is set up to produce convictions. And from all of the facts and evidence I've been able to see, the allegations, if proven, show a violation of law. But that's still something a jury will have to consider. And the big question amongst my community of criminal defense attorneys is, how can the state ever get 12 individuals to all agree that the former president violated a specific law at a specific time in a specific way, considering the overarching political theme following everything? You can't get, or it would be very difficult, I should say, to get 12 people into a room and have them all agree on all the details. That's very difficult when you've got well-trained, experienced lawyers armed with evidence trying to divide that jury into multiple camps. There's also the idea of pursuing a judicial, almost jury nullification result for the former president, wherein he puts the entire criminal system on trial. He's already started to do that with his First Amendment defense, indicating to everyone that the system is criminalizing his free speech. How is he supposed to go argue and support himself if what he says can be construed as breaking the law? And that's a great question. A lot of jurors may not want to convict someone based on a speech-based theory, because it's so anathema to the American promise. There are a lot of options out there for the former president in fighting this case, and we haven't even started talking about appeals and managing the calendar.
All right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Any final thoughts before we let you go?
Just thank you so much for having me, and I really encourage everybody. We're making history watching this. I can't express how unique this situation is and how many well-intentioned, hard-working professionals and lay people are working to make sure our system works the best it can.
All right, thank you so much, Attorney Josh Schiffer, for joining us with that insight and analysis. Again, pointing our viewers to AtlantaNewsFirst.com. We have an entire tab dedicated to the investigations into the former president. We encourage you to check that out. Download our free Atlanta News First mobile news app if you haven't done that yet. So that way you will get an alert sent right to your phone if and when an indictment does come down. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.